Okay, so today what we're doing is we're starting some practice questions, basically looking at the topics that we started with yesterday. So context-dependent cues, state-dependent cues, maintenance and elaborative rehearsal, and serial position effect. So mostly multiple choice, but we will look at a short answer question as well towards the end. So yeah, without further delay, let's just get started with the questions. Yes. So the first are just two multiple choice taken from two of the kind of recent BCA exams. So I'll give you guys about probably 4 minutes because you've got to do a bit of reading for the second one. So 4 minutes on the clock for you guys to try these two multiple choice questions now. Oh, so annoying. Okay, so in about 1 minute, we will look at the answers for the questions. Okay, so I think I'll start reading through the first question. So it says, the term used to describe the tendency to recall the items at the beginning of a list better than those that occur later in the list is. And then you've got a few words now. And obviously C and D, we've never come across those terms before. So we can eliminate those options. So it's either going to be A or B. Now it says to recall the items at the beginning of a list better. So this is focused on the items at the start of the list. And we know that the items at the start of the list are the items we haven't recently encountered. So that means that it has to be A, the primacy effect. Okay, just remember the word primacy kind of sounds a bit like the word primary. And the word primary means like the first thing or the main like important thing that comes first. So the primacy effect is always concerned with the words at the beginning of a list. Okay, the recency effect is your better memory for words at the end of a list, because they're the words you've most recently kind of encountered. Okay, so that's A. The next one's a little bit more lengthy. So Trisha took a part in an experiment on memory. In stage 1 of the experiment, she was shown 20 words presented at a rate of 1 word every 2 seconds. Immediately after the final word was presented, Trisha was given 30 seconds to write down as many of the words as she could in any order. In stage 2 of the experiment, Trisha was shown 20 words, 10 of which she had seen in stage 1 of the experiment. She was then asked to identify the words she had seen in stage 1. The results of stage 1 of the experiment revealed that Trisha remembered 9 of the 20 words, the first 3 words, the last 5 words, and the 12th word. So this kind of scenario is a bit lengthy, and when you get multiple choice questions like this, Vika often do it to intimidate students. So a lot of the information in here isn't significant in the first place, but it's just there to confuse you. For example, it doesn't matter to us how many words were shown to her. It doesn't matter to us that the words were shown at a rate of 1 word every 2 seconds. That's unnecessary information. But sometimes the more information that's in the scenario, the more students kind of start to panic, and the more students will kind of confuse themselves and choose the wrong answer. So this is kind of just one of those multiple choice that Vika put in to kind of confuse students. Anyway, the results demonstrate, or these results demonstrate a serial position effect where so obviously the results of stage 1 experiment revealed that Trisha remembered 9 of 20 words, the first 3 words, the last 5 words, and the 12th word. Okay, so obviously we see here that she doesn't really remember the words in the middle quite well, because the 12th word would be somewhere in the middle of the list. That's remembered poorly. She remembers the first 3 words, which is pretty good, which shows some primacy effect there. But the last 5 words, she's remembered a lot better, because she's remembered more words than she did for the beginning of the list, yeah? So she's remembered more words from the end of the list compared to the beginning. So we would, based on that, it should be D, if I'm mistaken, unless I've written it wrong. No, it should be D. So recency effect is stronger than the primacy effect. And that's because the last 5 words are recalled more so than the first 3 words. Okay, 5 is obviously a bigger number than 3. So she shows a greater recency effect here than a primacy effect. All right, so how did everyone go with those 2 multiple choice? Were they okay, or was there anything confusing about them?
It was good.
All good? Okay. So just be careful. I know a lot of you especially don't like research methods, but again, this is not a research methods question just because it has the word experiment in it. It's just about reading it slowly, being calm, and just kind of taking in each bit of information that's in the scenario, rather than just looking at it and having a panic attack. Okay, so just take it one step at a time. It's not as hard as it looks. All right, so moving on to the next question. I'm going to give you guys about 4 minutes as well to do this one. So 4 minutes on the clock to try these 2 questions now. Okay, so you got about 2.5 minutes. Okay, you've got about 1 minute left. All right, so let's start reading through the question. Whoops, my alarm is going to cancel that. Okay, so while walking down the street, Mr. Harris bumped into one of his former students. He knew he had taught this particular student for 3 years at university, but he could not remember the student's name. A few hours later, when he was back at the university, Mr. Harris was able to remember the student's name as Dimitri. This is most likely due to the something. So obviously, when we're looking at this case study, we have to look at what is the case study or what is the scenario focusing on. In this case, it kind of focuses on the fact that once he got back to the university, he was able to remember the student's name. And we have to remember that the university is not an internal environment. It's not an emotional state. It's not a state of consciousness. It's not happening inside Mr. Harris. It's an external thing. And because the university is an external place, it's a physical environment, the best answer in this case would be D, presence of context-dependent cues. Okay, so everyone should have got a presence of context-dependent cues there. Talking about that, yeah?
You know, when we talk about context-dependent cues, you know how you said the external environmental factors?
Yeah.
And you mentioned location, right?
Yeah.
Can we also talk about the sounds, the sights, and the smells that we...
Yes, that could be related to that. So maybe when Mr. Harris gets back to the university and he's kind of standing in his lecture theatre, maybe the sight of the lecture theatre made him remember Dimitri sitting there, and then that helped him to remember Dimitri's name.
Is that like necessary? Like, do we have to include it?
Oh, you don't have to go that in depth, no. But it could be, if you're given a 3-mark or 2-mark question, it could be something you mentioned, but usually they wouldn't expect that from you for like, a 1-mark question. Yeah?
Okay, right, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But that's a good point. So when you're talking about the physical locations of a place, it doesn't just have to be the place itself. It could be the smells associated with that place. It could be the sights associated.
Or anything that helps you retrieve the information.
Anything relating to that location that helps you to retrieve that memory that you have there.
Yeah.
So let's say like if I was if I was working in a bakery from like when I was a teenager to when I was an adult, when I enter that bakery later on when I'm really old and I smell the kind of freshly baked bread and all that smell, I will start to remember all the memories of me working there, doing my shifts there, baking the bread and everything. So even the smells or the sights can help you remember. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Hello, Miss.
Cool. Yes?
Miss, I was late because I was in a different class. I had to submit some work, Miss.
That's okay, no worries, all good. We're just doing the multiple choice questions.
Okay.
Okay, so the next question was that 2 groups of adults were tested on their memory. Group 1 was given a list of 15 nonsense syllables, which is like syllables that aren't actually a word. They're just nonsense, like ICI or ABT, like words, syllables or groups of letters that don't actually make sense. And were tested on their immediate free recall of the list.
Wait, Miss?
Yeah.
I think Halima's got a question.
Oh, I didn't check that. Hold on.
Oh no, she said it, but I think you didn't hear her.
Oh, Halima, what was that? Sorry, I did not hear you.
That's okay. Is smell considered as a context-dependent cue? Because you know how you talked about sight?
It can be, but then it has to be connected to the location. So, like I said, if you're working in a bakery and there was a specific smell that you experienced in that location, that might help you to then retrieve that memory. So it has to be connected.
Miss, I was confused as well because it's like internal, external.
Oh no, internal means like if the smell is coming from an external source, like a location, then it would be context dependent. Generally, we don't say that smells are internal environment. We say that any state of consciousness is an internal environment, like being drunk, being sad, being happy. Those are more internal state dependent cues. Yeah. So go more into context dependent most of the time.
Thank you.
That's all right. Okay, so 2 groups of adults were tested on their memory. Group 1 was given a list of 15 nonsense syllables to study and were tested on their immediate free recall of the list. So the word being their immediate, okay? That's an important probably thing we need to look at. Group 2 studied the same list, and after 10 minutes of completing simple mathematical problems, aka there was a delay there, were tested on their free recall of the list. So according to the Atkinson-Shiffrin model of memory, which one of the following statements best accounts for the results? In group 2, so now we go back to our scenario and we look at what group 2 did. So group 2 studied the same list, but then they had a 10-minute delay of doing the maths problems. So in group 2, the nonsense syllables and then they start talking about which part of the list was retained in which store of memory. So we go back to our scenario and we look at, okay, group 2 had a delay, and then they were tested on the free recall of the list. Now, if you remember from yesterday, we talked about whenever there's a delay or whenever there's like a delayed recall or the person has to do a distracted task, there's a specific effect that gets eliminated, and that is the recency effect. So what we're going to say is that it cannot be option B because end of the list items will not be transferred to long-term memory because they've done a distracted task. Okay, so end of the list items become eliminated. It can't be option B. End of the list items were not retained in short-term memory. So again, it can't be option C because with option C, it's talking more about short-term memory. So we're not really looking at short-term memory because remember when we talk about items at the start of the list always go into long-term memory. So the only 2 options that can actually be, hold on one second. List were retained in short-term memory. Okay, I think I've mixed something up. Okay, so it can't be B because end of the list items, end of the list were transferred to long-term memory. No, it can't be option B. Option A, start of the list were retained in short-term memory. End of the list were not retained in short-term memory. Start of the list were not transferred. So it can't be D because yes, start of the list items are transferred to long-term memory. Can't be A. It should be C. Oh yeah, it was C. Okay. So as you just saw, questions like this and the way they're worded can actually be quite confusing. So it's option C, and they've done a little tricky thing here because they've written that words at the end of the list were not retained in short-term memory. So what this means is that words at the end of the list basically disappear from your short-term memory. So obviously the answer is C there, but it is a little bit confusing with the wording and everything. I put a little note here that only 50% of students got this correct back in 2013. So again, this isn't a really difficult question, but the wording of the question can be confusing. So just be careful with the wording of the question. And if you're not really clear with the stores of memory and what stores of memory are involved in primacy and recency effect, this can also kind of make you a little bit like confused as well. Because when we talk about primacy effect, the words that we store in primacy effect always go to long-term memory. But the words that we store with recency effect stay within short-term memory, okay? So it's really important to be able to distinguish between the primacy and recency effect, not just in terms of the position of the words in the list that are stored, but also in terms of where those words go. So do they stay in short-term memory or do they move to long-term memory? Okay, so that was a little bit of a confusing question. How did everyone go with these 2 questions though?
The last
or any do you need any further clarification on any of them?
No.
Yeah, everyone's all good? Okay, cool. So just be careful with the way that the VCAR questions are worded because honestly, sometimes they word questions in a very funny way. I think they do it intentionally to confuse students. But yeah, just be careful with the way questions can be worded. Okay, now we're looking at these 2 questions. So these 2 are a little bit shorter. So I think I'll give you guys about maybe 2 minutes to do this. Yeah, because there's not any long scenarios anymore we've got to read for these two. So I'll give you 2 minutes on the clock now to try out these two multiple choice questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you've got about 30 seconds left. Okay, I think we'll start reading the questions. So, Melina witnessed a bank robbery. Afterwards, Melina had difficulty describing the robbery to the police. The police suggested that taking her back to the site of the robbery may help her recall what happened. This is an example of the use of. So obviously, if we look at the scenario, they're kind of talking about taking her back to the site of the robbery, which is an external environment. It's a physical location. It's a physical place. So the best answer should be B. Okay, context-dependent cues. The next question is, which one of the following graphs best represents the serial position effect? So if you remember correctly from yesterday, I showed you guys a picture of a serial position effect graph, and I told you that sometimes they do assess that in multiple choice questions. So this is an example of a question like that taken from a past VICA exam. So obviously I also mentioned that a lot of the time our serial position effect graph kind of resembles the shape of a parabola or a U-shape, because the items at the beginning of the list show high recall, items at the end of the list show a high recall as well, and then the items in the middle kind of show a low recall, which is represented by the dip. So the answer should be C. Okay, you just have to make sure that you can match up the x-axis and the y-axis and understand what the position of items with reference to the percentage of recall looks like. So it's usually a U-shape or a parabola-like shape there. Okay, so that's basically those two questions. These were pretty easy and pretty straightforward, so I'm hoping everyone is all good with these questions. So I think we can probably move on to the next two. All right, so these questions are a little bit longer, so I think I will give you guys like four minutes. Yeah, 4 minutes to try out these two now. So I'll put 4 minutes on my timer. Yep.
Miss,
Yes?
are the media exams cancelled?
Initially, that's what we thought, but they still haven't confirmed it. So that's the problem. So I still don't know. So as for our SAC announcement or SAC date, we're going to have a meeting next week with our head of science, and she will probably tell us what we'll do about that. So I'll probably get back to you guys with a date for SAC by next week, inshallah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for now, just keep in mind that we could potentially still have it in the semester exam break. Semester exam period, but not earlier than that. Okay, so either then or later than that. Like we won't have it online in 2 weeks' time, for example.
Okay. Thanks, Miss.
Yep, no worries. Okay, how much time do we have now? We've got 30 seconds, so I think I will start reading the scenario for question 22. Okay, so when Linda was 5, she was attacked by a dog on the street, but since childhood, she has not thought about the incident. One evening, she watches a horror movie and is very frightened, and later that night finds herself remembering the dog attack in vivid detail. In this situation, Linda's memory of the dog attack has been prompted by, and then they give you a few options. So first of all, we have to think about the fact that this scenario is kind of focusing on the fact that she watches a horror movie one day and she's frightened, and then later on she starts to remember the dog attack again. Keeping in mind that during the dog attack, she would have also felt frightened. So it's kind of focusing on her emotional state or her internal emotional environment there. It's not a context-dependent cue because when Linda was watching the movie, she wasn't walking on the street. She was probably in her house, cozy, in her living room, watching the movie on the TV. So the same location or physical environment isn't being replicated in this scenario. It's just the same emotional state or emotional environment. So because of that, the answer should be B, okay? State-dependent cues. In preparation, so the next question is, in preparation for an upcoming test, Matthew reads a list of definitions multiple times, whereas Jeremy reads a list of definitions.
Miss?
Real-life examples of each term. Yes?
Miss, Hilal's saying that he can't join back because his power went out.
Okay, that's fine. That's okay. No worries.
Yeah, that's Miss.
I already marked him as here, so I'll just I'll put up the recording link afterwards on the social stream, and then he can just listen to the recording. Okay.
Okay, I'll tell you that. Thanks, Miss.
Yeah, no worries. All good. Okay, so in preparation for I've already read that, sorry. Question 9, Matthew's most likely engaging in something, whereas Jeremy's most likely engaging in something. So we're basically looking at what types of what types of rehearsal are both of these boys using. So when we look back to Matthew, it says Matthew reads a list of definitions multiple times, which kind of suggests that he's reading them over and over again. Whereas Jeremy reads the list of definitions, but he's putting meaning into them. He's thinking about real life examples of them for each word. He's kind of linking real life and real world examples to those definitions. So because Jeremy is taking the extra step and he's going the extra mile, Jeremy will have to be engaging in elaborative rehearsal. And for that reason, Matthew should be engaging in maintenance rehearsal because he's reading it again and again. So the answer should be here, maintenance rehearsal and elaborative rehearsal. And the only option that matches that is D. Okay, so everyone should have got option D for question 9. Okay, so if everyone is good with these 2 questions, we can move on to the next 2. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys about 4 minutes to try these 2 now. So I'll just put 4 minutes on the clock and you guys can start. 4 minutes, yep.
Miss, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
You know, in the previous question, question 22,
Yes,
what if that night Linda was walking through a different street, not the street that she was attacked on when she was 5? Would that still be considered as context-dependent cue?
If that street that she was walking through, the different street, was kind of similar to her street, maybe the footpath was looked similar, or maybe there were similar landmarks around her, then yes, it could be possible. And then that would be a context-dependent cue. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So it doesn't always have to be the exact location, but if it's the exact location, it's better for your memory, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Miss,
Yeah.
I'm having computer problems, so I need to like restart it, and then
Okay.
I'll join the class back.
Yeah, that should be fine. No worries.
Miss?
Yeah.
What's the interference theory?
Interference theory is it's an old study design topic. It's like when you learn two similar bits of information, sometimes they can interfere with one another.
Are we gonna learn that or?
No, it's not in the study design anymore.
Okay, so it was previously.
Yeah, it's good that it's been removed because it was a pretty confusing topic for a lot of students. So it's good that they've removed it.
Miss, I couldn't hear you. It kind of cut out.
Oh, no, I said it's good that they've removed that topic because it's a confusing topic.
Okay, but was it part of memory and everything?
Yeah, it was part of memory.
Okay.
There were quite a few theories that used to be in the study design but have been removed for this particular study design.
Okay, thank you.
That's all right. You might come across them when you do past exam questions, like you've got interference theory, you've got decay, proactive interference, retroactive interference, all of that stuff. But yeah, it's no longer part of our study design. So don't stress if you see those words.
Yeah, I was watching something related to what we're doing now, so
yeah.
I saw it there. That's why.
Okay, yeah. It's not in our study design. Okay, so I'm going to read through this case study. So Shelley and Tina are playing a game with their mother. Their mother reads a list of 20 unrelated words at a rate of 1 word a second. And then the girls have to try to write down as many as they can remember in any order. Shelley begins writing the words down as soon as her mother, so immediately, finishes reading the list. But Tina's pencil breaks and she has to go to her room to find another pencil before she gets the chance to write down the words she can recall. So there's some kind of delay there in Tina's recall. Okay, so the recall pattern that Shelley is likely to display with her. So let's go back to Shelley. Now, Shelley is showing immediate recall there. She's immediately writing down. So she's going to have a recency effect, but that doesn't mean she's not going to have a primacy effect. In fact, Shelley is actually going to show both effects. Okay, so it should be C. 23 should be C then. Okay, because all the other D is not even a part of serial position effect theory. But options A and B are not correct because we have to remember that people who have immediate recall or they're tested on immediate recall of words without a distracted task always show both effects. They do show recency effect a little bit better, but that option is not in the multiple choice here. So our best answer would be C. So question 24, the recall pattern that Tina is likely to display would show. So Tina is the girl who is showing the delayed recall there because she broke her pencil. She had to go to her room to find another pencil. So there's some delay there. So what's going to happen with Tina's recall is that the recency effect or her memory of words that she recently read that were in her short-term memory are going to be eliminated. Okay, so she's not going to have a recency effect, but she is going to have a primacy effect. So let's look for the option that matches that. It should be A, okay? A primacy effect, but no recency effect will be shown by Tina. Does this make sense to everybody? Because I know this topic can be a little bit confusing. So yeah, if you have any questions about this question, just put them in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and ask me. But if not, we'll just keep moving on. Okay, yeah, I'll give you guys like 2 minutes to do this one because it's like pretty short. So 2 minutes on the clock now to work on this multiple choice, on these two multiple choice. And remember, when it says from a cognitive perspective for question 12, what they're really meaning is like from a memory perspective or from a memory point of view. And all of these words obviously related to memory. Okay, we've got about 1 more minute left. Okay, we've got about 20 seconds left, so I think I will just start reading that scenario. So Ryan is trying to remember a shopping list and repeats it over and over again in his head. So remember yesterday we were saying that whenever someone is repeating something multiple times to themselves, or whether they're repeating information over and over again, that's always kind of connected to the concept. Whoops. My timer just went off. Okay, so that's kind of connected to this idea of rote learning, okay? And we had a special word for rote learning that we learned about. So from a cognitive perspective, repeating the information over and over again in his head enhances Ryan's memory of the list through which process? So the other word that we use for rote learning, or for repeating information again and again in your head in the hopes that it'll get into your memory, is maintenance rehearsal. So the answer should be C, okay? Now, obviously, if Ryan was to take all the shopping list items from his shopping list and turn that into like a story, or turn it into a song, or visualize them in his head and make some visual connections to memory there, that would all be elaborative rehearsal then. But he hasn't made any attempt to go the extra step. He's just simply trying to blindly memorize those foods that he needs in his shopping list. So it is maintenance rehearsal there. Okay, so question 13 is from a biological perspective. This enhances Ryan's memory of the list through the process of, so you've got a few options there. Now, obviously, when you're repeating information over and over again in your head, even if it is kind of rote learning, even if it is blind memorization, you're still revising that information. You're still repeating that information to yourself. And every time you repeat that information to yourself, your neural connections do something. They basically keep getting activated for that particular bit of information. And the specific key term that we use for that is long-term potentiation. So the answer should be B, okay? None of the other options there make any sense because long-term depression is about decreasing the neural networks, which wouldn't be happening here. Neural inhibition, we haven't even learned about that term. And action potential is just another word for neural messages. So that wouldn't be correct there. So the best answer there would be B. Okay, I think everyone should be good with these two because they weren't too difficult. So we'll just move on to the next question. So I'll give you guys about 3 minutes now to try these two, and we're almost done. We've got about 20 seconds left. Okay, so I think we'll just go through the, I'll just read through this and we'll just read through the scenario. When Peter was in high school, he spent every weekend working in a bakery. 30 years later, whenever Peter feels hungry and thinks about freshly baked bread, he recalls his experience in the old shop. So this is kind of like, it's written in a way that it's supposed to confuse you, okay? Because we always talk about like context-dependent cues as being about like a place. In this case, the way the question is worded is trying to confuse you and make you double guess your answer. So we have to look at what the question is actually focusing on. So it says 30 years later, whenever Peter feels hungry and thinks about freshly baked bread, okay? It doesn't say that Peter is in the bakery. It doesn't say whenever he opens the door and walks into the bakery. It says whenever he feels hungry, okay? So feeling hungry is a state. It's something that's happening inside Peter. It's an internal environment. And for that reason, this is not an example of a context-dependent cue, but rather an example of a state-dependent cue. So it should be C, okay? Because the question is not focusing on him stepping into the bakery. It's not focusing on him, walking in or like, like standing in line in the bakery. It's just focusing on him feeling hungry. And that's an internal environment rather than an external one. The next question is, Arlo is a keen basketballer who plays on indoor and outdoor courts. During an indoor grand final, she fell over and twisted her knee. Her team also lost the game. Now, whenever Arlo plays on an indoor court, she becomes emotional. So in this case, it's kind of focusing on the fact that whenever Arlo plays on an indoor court is a physical place. It's a location. It's an external environment. It doesn't say that whenever Arlo feels pain in her knee. It doesn't say whenever Arlo feels disappointment. It's not talking about her internal state she experienced when she cost the team the game. It's talking about the external place she was in, which was the indoor court. So it says the indoor basketball court would act as what? So obviously the best answer in this case would be a context-dependent cue, which should be D. So hopefully everybody got that. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the next question, and this is our last question for today. It's just a short answer question. Because it's only worth 2 marks, I would like everyone to give it a go. It's not a long question. I'm going to give everyone about 4 minutes to just jot down some points you might talk about with reference to an answer like this. So you don't have to write a full answer there. Just jot down a few points or keywords you think would be important in a question like this. Okay, you've got 1 minute left. Okay, I'll just start reading through the case study. So Theo is an actor who learns the words of the play at home, but then finds that he has trouble remembering them when he's performing on stage. Explain how Theo could use state-dependent cues to help him remember the words of the play when he is performing on stage. So it's asking you to talk about state-dependent cues, not context-dependent, okay? So you can't start talking about him practicing the words on the stage and then performing them on the stage and remembering them better. That's not going to work because then you're focusing on the location, okay? Because it's about state-dependent cues, we're focusing more on Theo's internal environment. So we could make reference to an emotional state. We could make reference to any kind of internal environment that helps him to remember the words of the play. So I'll just show you guys what the average mark was in 2012. So the average mark for this from the assessor's report is 0.9 out of 2. So 44% of students that year left this question blank in the exam. That's why they got 0 marks for that. Or they wrote something that was completely rubbish that couldn't even get a mark. 1 mark was given to 19% of students, and about 37% of students got full marks for this question. So the average was 0.9 out of 2, which isn't amazing, but it's all right, not too bad as well. So the first mark that you get for this question is for simply defining state-dependent cues. And this doesn't mean you write state-dependent cues refers to blah, blah, blah. Making any reference to that keyword in state-dependent cues will get you the mark. As long as you wrote something along the lines of state-dependent cues are focused on internal environments of the person, that would have automatically gotten you 1 mark, okay? So here I've just written, Theo could use state-dependent cues to maintain the same internal or emotional environment. So that gets us 1 mark there. Now, the other 1 mark is obviously coming from the example where you're linking state-dependent cues to how Theo could use that state-dependent cue to help him remember the words of the play. So what I've written here is I've just linked it to an emotional state. So I've said if Theo is excited while learning the words of the play at home, so he's kind of pumped up, excited, learning the words at home, he should try to also be excited when he performs on stage, as this emotional state will act as a retrieval cue, helping him to remember the words. So in other words, it's important for Theo to try to maintain as best as he can the same emotional environment or internal emotional state, both at home while he's practicing as well as on the stage when he's doing the actual performance. Now, I'll tell you how this could affect. If Theo was excited and happy and all pumped up while he was learning the words of the play at home, and then when he gets on the stage, he's completely frozen with anxiety and fear. Anxiety and fear is the complete polar opposite emotion to excitement and enthusiasm, okay? So those 2 emotions, because they're so different and they're not compatible, they basically constitute 2 different internal emotional states or internal environments for Theo. And he's not able to then retrieve that information he learned in an excited state because he isn't excited on stage. He's actually anxious and worried, okay? So that would be a really good example that you could make. You could make reference to anything. So you could say if Theo is hungry while learning the words of the play at home, he should try to be hungry while he performs on stage. Or if Theo is happy while learning the words of the play at home, he should try to be happy. Or if Theo is anxious while learning the words of the play at home, he should try to be anxious. But then anxiety is kind of a difficult one because people tend to forget things when they're anxious. So that's probably not a really good example there. But any kind of emotional state that would logically make sense for this question could easily be fit into this answer. So it's a very easy question. You just have to know what are the key things you need to include. Okay, anyone have any questions about this particular question?
Miss, when we talk about home, in this scenario, can we be like a little extra and be like, it acts as like a secure environment for him?
So you mean if Theo feels
Yeah, secure, like
Problem with
performing
that
at
would
home
be,
rather than on the stage.
I wouldn't go with that, because then it would be kind of edging on the kind of concept of context dependent cues, because then you're focusing on the place rather than the internal emotion or the internal environment.
Yes, but isn't feeling secure a psychological
but
state?
but the thing is, the feeling of security comes from the place he's in. So whereas enthusiasm or excitement are kind of, it doesn't have to be related to place. It's something that can, I don't know, I'd be a little bit cautious about talking about security, because generally any performer, no matter how experienced they are, when they get on stage, they will have a bit of nerves. They won't be completely feeling secure. So it's a little bit harder to reproduce that internal environment on stage. Yeah, I'd probably...
Yes, but see how when you're overexcited, can't you also forget?
That's the thing. He should try to be excited. So we're not saying he will necessarily be. And that's the reason why a lot of the time when people have to do like performances, or you have to present your oral presentation, you do get nervous in class compared to when you were practicing it at home. Because no matter how much we try to imitate the same emotional state of being calm or being excited or thinking positive, we can't always imitate that in the new environment. Okay? But we're saying try to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's basically it for today. Just have to see that's basically it for today. So what I need you guys to basically do is to just focus on, the due work for this week, which is basically the learning activities, and is basically the looking at what you need to be doing for this week, because you do have quite a few learning activities you need to be completing. So I just want everyone to focus on those learning activities there. Okay, so everyone can now move over to the class page if you don't have any other questions. And you can basically get started on that learning activity there. Okay, and if you've got any other questions, I'll be hanging around for a few more minutes. So just put them in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and just ask me. Yeah, so everyone can move over now to the class page on the school box, and you can get started with your learning activities.